Hey, welcome everybody to the 40 Finance channel. Today we're going to do a quick fundamental analysis of Microsoft stock using the earnings projections as well as some forward PE metrics. And the goal here is to make a price prediction for where the stock will land. And it gets even more interesting with the stock like Microsoft because they have a July fiscal year. So we sort of have like two big events going on in the calendar year of 2025. I base most of my price predictions on annual EPS and annual revenue. And if you're in a hurry and don't want to go through all the calculations, the bottom line is I see a pretty easy $50 available for Microsoft stock with its current price through the first part, probably the very first part of 2025. And quick plug here before we jump in, we'll be using Seeking Alpha Premium for all of my data points throughout the calculations. And if you're interested in learning more about this stock research platform, use the link in the description for a 7-day free trial, as well as a few bucks off of your first year. All right, price today for Microsoft, it's swinging between about 411 and 413. Today's a down day from the NASDAQ, which is kind of weighing on things. You see down about 1% today. But I called out earlier about the July fiscal year. So I want to show you something here because it'll come into play as the projections go on later in the video. And what you have here is a seasonality slash win rate for the stock historically over the past 10 years. And the two price projections I have are going to be landing right in this fiscal period end time, okay? So you see June and July, you've had over the past 10 years, 2% win rate and let's just call it 4% win rate in July. What's interesting, though, while both of those numbers are green, Microsoft last year, if we just look at 2024, you had a big run up in June, almost 8% last year, and then that was followed by a decline in July, and you saw a smaller version of the same thing in 2023, and then in 2022, you're actually down in June and up in July. And the point here is not to really rely on these numbers, that's what it's going to be again this year or last year or whatever, but it's just sort of to call out the importance of the June-July timeframe for Microsoft stock, because ultimately what you have in that timeframe is a shift in focus from the EPS and revenue estimates in the current year, if you will, and then all of a sudden the light switches and you're looking at the next year. So that will come into play. Now, another part of my price prediction comes in with, how have they outperformed or underperformed in earnings calls over the past several quarters. So I use this little tab here on Seeking Alpha Earnings Surprise. I'm going to switch it to quarterly. And this is the EPS section. You see a lot of green bars. I feel like it's easier to look down here at the table for myself. But bottom line, if you can even see this column, it has the amount of EPS they surprised by. And it's obviously green, even if you can't read the numbers. And over the past several quarters, they've beat as high as 34 cents, and they've come in flat. But for how I'm doing this quick projection, I'm just going to say, on average, Microsoft has beat their earnings, their consensus earnings, by about 10 cents each of the last several quarters. And the other thing I'm going to do while I'm here is just make sure we're not missing on the revenue, the top line. We can't have huge revenue misses because that's just going to drag everything down from a momentum scale. And you see that it's been pretty consistent. They did have a down quarter back in, looks like December of 2022 and June of 2022. But for the most part, they've been in the green. So it seems like consensus revenue estimates have not been over-exaggerated, if you will, by the analysts in the past several quarters. All right, next number we need is some sort of a consensus EPS estimate, which I have right here. And at least today, prior to the market opening today, that consensus estimate was $13.16. You had a low of $12.93 and a high of $13.75. Then if we look ahead to next year, just keep in mind that that jumps up to $15.02 with a low of $14.30 and a high of $16.69. So this number in particular, which is the consensus EPS estimate for this fiscal year, that kind of sets the bar to allow us to measure the forward PE as we look ahead on the next screen. Switch it over here to the valuation tab. I am always, for all of these videos, I'm always looking at forward PE. I don't care about the current PE. I want to speculate what the multiple is for earnings that are coming down the line. And when you have a behemoth stock like Microsoft, you very rarely have huge changes to the consensus EPS and the consensus revenue. But for today, we have PE gap forward of 31.58. That's where it stands today based on that consensus earnings estimate we just looked at the last screen. Now, historically, and this is where it gets important, historically, Seeking Alpha gives us a 5-year average. What is the 5-year average of the multiple that has been seen in their system? Now remember, 5-year average, that goes back to 2020, and we have had some ebbs and flows in the market. So there may have been other times that Microsoft had a higher multiple. Maybe it was 35, maybe it was 27. This 5-year average factors all of those things in. And right now, in a small sign of value to be had, you have Microsoft's 5-year forward PE average coming in basically flat with where we stand today. So 31.7 is the 5-year average versus 31.58. It's actually cheaper by 0.38% than you've seen in the past. Now, the next thing I want to eyeball is just make sure that the growth metrics for this stock, Microsoft, are growing at a similar pace to what we've seen in the past, because once your growth starts slowing, it will drag down the multiple that people are willing to pay. So if we look at revenue growth forward, again, that's a projection, 14.32%. The 5-year average for Microsoft is 13.24%. So that looks good. That's actually a growth rate that is 8% higher than the 5-year average. Next, if we check on the EPS growth rate projected, it's coming in right about 16%, and that is also on par with the 5-year average that comes in at 15.67%. And again, with all these growth numbers, we just want to make sure, or I should say, I want to make sure as I'm going through this, that we don't have a steep drop-off on our EPS growth and we don't have a steep drop-off on our revenue growth. That doesn't appear to be the case here with Microsoft. All right, so let's get into my price projections for Microsoft. Today is February 3rd. I've highlighted July fiscal year. That will come into play. Forward PE is 31.58. The 5-year average is 31.7, so they're basically the same, right? So it would not appear, or I would say very likely, that the multiple would change significantly if we have a market downturn. Obviously, the multiple is going to go down. If we have some sort of amazing news, then people will pay up a little bit. But where we stand today, it's right in line with what people are willing to pay for the growth. All right, we looked at the EPS consensus. It was right about 13.16. So with that consensus, we know there's highs, there's lows, but what has the trend been? And the trend, in my opinion, last several quarters, you got an average of about a 10-cent beat every quarter if you factored them all together. Some were higher, some were lower, who cares? I'm going to say 10 cents. And with that, I'm going to make my estimate for the EPS $13.40. And that includes the fact that we have 2 quarters left in this fiscal year. So you add 20 cents to this 13.16 and you get to 13.36. And so that includes 2 quarters of outperforming 10 cents, and that gets you to whatever, 13.36. So I just rounded it up to 13.40. Now, one thing I normally do that's not appropriate here, I'll do this like market signal and just kind of try to figure out what does the market think the EPS will be. But since the current forward PE and the 5-year are so close to each other, it's just negligible results. But what I've done with stocks in the past is I've divided their earnings by the 5-year PE, and it gives you like sort of an idea what the market expects out of the EPS as of today, or like their live stock price, if you will. That comes in at 1303 for Microsoft. Again, we're on a down day, 1% down, so there's just not a lot to worry about it. I just wanted to highlight it because it's on the screen. All right, so for me, I always ask the same questions. What will change over time for Microsoft? Will it be the multiple? Will the multiple go up or down? And we make a guess there. Or will it be the EPS going up or down? And I make a guess there. And for me, this time, I say the actual EPS lands higher than the consensus that's on the board today, and return to a 5-year average forward PE, which is, negligible, like I said, but it gives you a couple decimal points. So 1340 times 3170 for the multiple. That gives you 424.78. I'm going to round it up to 425. So $425, right around when the April earnings report comes out. So that's not $50, right? Like I alluded to in the beginning, that's only, $10 or $15 based on today's price. However, we know that the time period of May through July is there'll be a reset for Microsoft from a valuation standpoint, because everyone will be talking about 2026. And so right here, another leg up when the 2026 fiscal year comes into focus. That fiscal year begins on July 25. Right now, the consensus for that is 1502. We'll stick with our 5-year PE, and that gives you a stock price of $476, which is $50 or more from where we're at today. So depending on where today lands, let's see where we're at, 411.61. So 411.61 minus 475 is roughly $64. So I said 50 at the beginning of this video. I'll go on the record and say I see, a solid $60+ from today, from the 411 price point, heading into June/July when we shift all of our focus to 2026. All right, guys, so there you have it, a quick fundamental analysis and price prediction for Microsoft stock here in February. Let me know what you think. Do you think the multiple's higher? Do you think the EPS goes higher? How are you approaching that June-July fiscal year switch? Before you go, don't forget to check out that special offer for Seeking Alpha Premium down in the comments. I hope everyone's doing well. We'll see you on the next video.